Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the messy, complicated, and frankly fascinating fabric of American history. We're looking at 8 massively disparate events that prove the American story isn't just some simple straight line of triumph. It's a complex tapestry. Woven into this fabric are wild legends of the frontier, truly heartbreaking tragedies, bizarre unsolved mysteries, and world-altering innovations. We're going to break down these defining moments and see exactly how they shaped the nation we know today.
To help us make sense of this massive scope, we'll structure our explainer today into 4 distinct thematic chapters: the wild frontier, tragedies of racial injustice, America's unsolved mysteries, and finally, the price of modernity.
All right, let's get into Chapter 1, The Wild Frontier, Legends and Lawlessness. You know, we've all heard the myth of Custer's Last Stand, right? It's usually portrayed as this solitary, heroic defeat of one brave commander. But the reality? It was a desperate, incredibly complex clash of 2 completely different worlds colliding. Following the 1874 discovery of gold in the Black Hills, prospectors just flooded into sacred lands that were actually protected by the Treaty of Fort Laramie. When native leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse absolutely refused to surrender their ancestral homes, the U.S. military mobilized. The stage was set for an inevitable, tragic collision.
So in June 1876, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer made an aggressive miscalculation that literally sealed his fate. He just assumed the native village would scatter, so Custer divided his 7th Cavalry into separate battalions. But instead of a fleeing camp, he ran into thousands of highly organized Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. Led by brilliant tacticians like Crazy Horse, these warriors quickly surrounded Custer's isolated, outmanned forces. In a staggeringly short amount of time, Custer and every single soldier in his immediate command were killed. It was a massive Native victory, though sadly it only accelerated the U.S. government's push to force Native groups onto reservations.
Just 5 years later, down in the Arizona Territory, another legend was born in a dusty town called Tombstone. Tensions between local lawmen, the brothers Virgil, Wyatt, and Morgan Earp, along with Doc Holliday, and a group of alleged outlaws known as the Cowboys, had finally reached a boiling point. Over a dispute about carrying illegal firearms in town, the 2 factions faced off in a narrow lot. And the gunfight itself? It was incredibly brief, lasting less than 30 seconds. Around 30 shots were fired in that chaotic half-minute, leaving 3 cowboys dead and instantly cementing this wild moment into eternal Wild West lore.
Well, the initial shootout was actually ruled legal by a judge, but the violence was far from over. It triggered what we now know as the infamous Earp Vendetta Ride. After Virgil was crippled in an ambush and Morgan was assassinated while playing billiards, Wyatt Earp decided to take the law into his own hands. He and Doc Holliday launched a bloody, relentless pursuit across Arizona, hunting down anyone they believed was responsible. This unyielding quest for frontier justice is what really transformed Wyatt Earp into the ultimate symbol of the Wild West.
Moving on to Chapter 2, Tragedies of Racial Injustice, the Darkest Chapters.
In the summer of 1921, the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, often called Black Wall Street, was one of the wealthiest and most successful black communities in the entire United States. But I want you to just imagine this for a second. In less than 24 hours, 35 city blocks and 1,200 homes were turned completely to ash, and up to 300 people lost their lives. An entire, thriving, prosperous community was essentially erased overnight.
You might be wondering, how does something like that escalate so quickly? Well, it started with a heavily disputed interaction in a downtown elevator between a young black man, Dick Rowland, and a white operator, Sarah Page. Fueled by highly sensationalized newspaper reports, an armed white mob gathered at the local courthouse. When black veterans arrived to prevent a lynching, a shot was fired and chaos absolutely exploded. By the next morning, white mobs were looting and burning Greenwood to the ground. Eyewitnesses even reported the unbelievable sight of private airplanes flying overhead, dropping incendiary devices onto roofs. And shockingly, for decades afterward, this massacre was met with absolute silence. Barely even a footnote in history books until historians and survivors relentlessly fought to uncover the truth.
This heartbreaking legacy of violence sadly continued right into the Civil Rights era. Fast forward to August 1955. 14-year-old Emmett Till, just a kid visiting family from Chicago, was brutally kidnapped and murdered in Money, Mississippi. His alleged offense? A perceived social interaction with Carolyn Bryant, a white store clerk. Days later, Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam dragged Emmett from his great-uncle's home in the dead of night. His severely beaten body was later discovered in the Tallahatchie River.
Facing unimaginable tragedy,
Emmett's mother, Mamie Till Mobley, uttered these incredibly powerful words, "Let the people see what I've seen." By bravely insisting on an open casket funeral back in Chicago, she literally forced the entire country to witness the horrifying, ugly reality of the segregated South. Even though Emmett's killers were acquitted by an all-white jury, only to shamelessly confess in a magazine interview later, think about how much extraordinary courage it took for a grieving mother to transform her profound personal loss into a major catalyst for the modern civil rights movement. It changed the nation forever.
Okay, Chapter 3 takes a turn into the bizarre, America's unsolved mysteries, shadows, and folklore.
Between 1918 and 1919, a phantom killer absolutely terrified the vibrant city of New Orleans. The Axeman would inexplicably break into homes, often belonging to Italian-American grocers, by chiseling out a panel in the back door. But here is the truly terrifying part. He didn't even bring a weapon. He used the victim's own axes found at the scene. And strangely enough, he never took a dime of their money or any valuables. The total lack of motive or a clear identity sent the entire city into an absolute panic.
What makes this reign of terror so surreal is how it morphed into this weird cultural event. In March 1919, local newspapers received a letter from a self-proclaimed demon from hell, the Axeman himself. The writer promised he would strike again on the following Tuesday night, but he offered one bizarre loophole. He would spare any house where jazz music was playing. So what did the terrified city do? They threw an absolute rager. Residents packed into dance halls, moved pianos into their living rooms, and blasted records. The whole city literally erupted in jazz until dawn. Amazingly, no one was killed that night, and the Axeman eventually just vanished without a trace.
Decades later, another mystery captured the public's imagination, and it all revolved around this massive sum of cash, $200,000. On the day before Thanksgiving, in 1971, a quiet, unassuming man using the alias Dan Cooper boarded a flight in Portland, calmly ordered a bourbon, and then casually handed a flight attendant a note. He opened his briefcase to reveal what looked exactly like a bomb, demanding $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes.
After the plane landed in Seattle and authorities delivered the ransom, Cooper kept the crew on board and gave them incredibly specific demands. Fly at 10,000 feet, keep the speed at exactly 170 miles per hour, and lower the Boeing 727's unique rear staircase right in the middle of the flight. Somewhere over the freezing, rain-soaked Pacific Northwest, he jumped out of the plane into the pitch-black night. Despite one of the largest manhunts in American history, he completely vanished. In 1980, a young boy actually found $6,000 of the matching ransom bills buried by a river, but no trace of Cooper himself was ever found. The FBI finally closed the case 45 years later, leaving D.B. Cooper an absolute legend.
Let's move to our final chapter, The Price of Modernity, Science and Sensation.
We're starting this section with the crime of the century. In 1932, aviator Charles Lindbergh was basically America's greatest hero. But on March 1st, his 20-month-old son was kidnapped right out of his nursery. It triggered this frantic media circus and a desperate, drawn-out ransom negotiation. Tragically, the baby's body was discovered in the nearby woods 2 months later. Fast forward to 1934, authorities tracked ransom gold certificates to a carpenter named Bruno Hauptmann. Following an unprecedented and highly sensationalized trial, Hauptmann was convicted and executed in 1936, though, honestly, debates about his sole guilt linger even to this day.
Now, this wasn't just a media spectacle. It fundamentally changed the world we live in today. The massive public outrage directly resulted in the passing of the Federal Kidnapping Act, which became commonly known as the Lindbergh Law. It gave federal authorities like the FBI immense new powers to investigate kidnappings across state lines. It permanently modernized the law enforcement system as we know it.
Meanwhile, as law enforcement modernized at home, an even bigger, far more dangerous scientific leap was happening in total secret. In 1942, terrified that Nazi Germany was developing a superweapon, the U.S. launched the Manhattan Project. This was a staggering $2 billion operation. Over 130,000 workers were employed in hidden cities constructed literally from scratch. And the wildest part? Most of those workers had absolutely no idea what they were actually building.
The logistics required for this were just immense. Massive facilities at Oak Ridge enriched uranium, while the Hanford site produced plutonium.
Then, brilliant minds out at Los Alamos, led by J. Robert Oppenheimer, tested this impossibly complex implosion design at the Trinity test on July 16, 1945. It all culminated, of course, in the devastating deployment of atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
When the blinding flash of that Trinity test lit up the New Mexico desert, the scientists were struck by awe, but mostly by absolute terror. Witnessing the sheer devastation of this first atomic blast, lead scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer recalled this chilling line from Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." In that single moment, he realized exactly what humanity had just unleashed.
This scientific breakthrough created a profound paradox for the modern world. Yes, the atomic bombs brought an immediate end to the horrors of World War II, as Japan surrendered shortly after the devastating strikes. However, that very same science plunged global civilization straight into the decades-long Cold War. It forever burdened humanity with the terrifying reality of mutually assured destruction, the terrible knowledge that we now possess the literal capability to completely destroy ourselves.
As we look back at these 8 incredible chapters, the wild legends, the heartbreaking tragedies, the folklore mysteries, and the world-ending science, it's so clear that the fabric of America is woven from intense extremes. It leaves us with one incredibly provocative thought to ponder about our own legacy. From the dust of Little Bighorn to the ashes of the atomic bomb, how will future generations remember the history that we are making today? Thank you so much for exploring these sources with me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the history around you.